said that you had like wanted the different topics of controversial issues that you're interested in talking about, like as Christians, like we face in the world today. You know, like you had posted things about like going to a friend's wedding where like you know that they're involved in adultery or cheating, or like if someone invites you to go to their wedding and there's like a homosexual marriage, just various different controversial issues. So I was planning on like taking a break from talking about like the main thing we have been talking about for the past several weeks, and kind of just touch on that a little bit, which actually works out because a lot of people aren't here. But I was wanting us to like do a little brainstorming together and think if we can like come up with some stuff that you might face in life that are controversial that we run into like on a daily basis, or even like on a grander scheme, like political or like bigger than us, you know, in the world. I know this is something you're interested in. We can talk about those things, and we have some Bible verses that I picked out. But this one's less of like me kind of leading it, but more of just kind of discussion to talk about these different things, because I feel like it's really unfortunate, like in the social climate we live in, like people can't talk about this kind of stuff. They just get angry and like rant on Facebook, you know. But like I feel like these things are really important to talk about. So I guess we'll write some stuff down as we think about it. Is there any like issues you're specifically hit close to home, or that you've heard on like the news, or I want to write down the ones that you had already mentioned. Just shout them out.
Those are mine, so I'm set.
Do you have any that you can think of?
Does gender identity fall in that?
Oh, sure. That's anything. That's very controversial.
I'm going to California, and like you say, hey, sir, are you going there? And then they're like, I associate myself as a woman.
Like you're trying to be
sue you over that.
Like you're trying to be polite, you know, by calling someone ma'am or sir, and like it's thrown back in your face. It's like, my bad. Like,
well, they can actually like sue you for it. Like,
so
it's ridiculous.
It's like, if you don't know, it's not your fault.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you're purposely calling them sir when they've told you like you don't like that, I mean, I guess that could be harassment. But like if you're just going off of what you see, I mean, it's not your fault. Like, I'm afraid to like call people ma'am and Mrs. and Mr. now, because I'm like, you don't know. Gender identity.
Hey, I associate as they.
No, I actually work with someone who, and it's very hard because like my brain isn't used to like having to think that much, you know, to like do everything in like what tense is like the new instead of saying he or she or his or her, like I have to be like they and their, and it's just a huge mental like
breakdown. Like
I have to like constantly think about what I'm gonna say, and it's just really exhausting actually. Gender identity, I guess that would go with like transgender and stuff too.
Like, you need people just like wear name tags of like, call me these things.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Actually.
I think political views too.
Politics.
Yeah.
Ugh, it's getting so bad.
Yeah.
Like, it's getting so bad. Fun fact, politics. Poly means multiple. Ticks are blood-sucking insects. Just something I noticed that was funny. Random. Yeah, like, especially on Facebook, I have to, like, just start unfollowing stuff because it's just so much negativity all the time. It's really unfortunate. Racism. What else is current issues? I mean, even, it doesn't have to be, like, this big stuff. It can be small stuff. Like, when I used to work at Erlanger, I mean, working in the hospital, we all know, is not exactly the most positive and uplifting environment you can be in ever in your life. Like, after work, I'd always get invited to go out to the bar with my coworkers and stuff. Which, you know, doesn't sound like an ethical dilemma, but, like, when you're trying to, like, make friends with your coworkers, it's hard to do that when, like, you don't want to go there, you know? And then they all kind of, like, they don't want to be your friend. It's not they don't want to be your friend. It's just they're just like, oh, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I get that. That happened to me too when I started out.
Like literally, that's all they ever. They
Yeah.
don't ever want to do anything else. It's just like, hey, we're gonna go get some drinks. And I went like one time just to like go, but like I didn't order anything, and then it was really awkward.
Oh, no.
Because like they're just like, oh, you're not getting anything. I'm like, no. And then it was like, oh, why not? And it was like I was just hoping to like just order
Maybe.
a Sprite and like go under the radar, But no, it turned into this
Yeah.
whole thing of like, oh, you don't drink. It's like no, it's like, oh, have you ever? It's like, well, no. It's like, oh, have you never had a shot before? And I'm like, oh god. Like, oh, you can have your first one. I'm like, no, I'm good, thanks. Like, and it's just this whole thing. Anyways, I guess we can put, I don't know, peer pressure. That sounds so lame. Peer pressure. Even like within church, even within like the SDA church, like how to keep Sabbath. I feel like this is actually a controversial issue. Like some people are super conservative. They don't buy gas. They don't, ooh, I dropped something. They don't like do anything but breathe and read the Bible. And then there's people that like treat it like literally any other day. It's no different. So I'm gonna write that down. Someone's here. Hey Michelle, welcome. Hello.
This is my aunt.
Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's your name?
Maria.
Maria. Welcome. You can sit wherever you like. We're just talking about controversial issues in the church today.
People are.
I'm filming it for someone who's not here.
Oh,
You're good. I just wanted to let you know. We're just throwing out topics that are in the world today, or like specifically within our own lives or in the church in general, like that are controversial, that pose ethical dilemmas. So we have abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, like transgender, like politics is a big one right now with elections and everything, racism. I put peer pressure here, like for me, I was talking about like at work, when I used to work at the hospital, like my coworkers, you trying to be friends with them, but like they invite you out to go drinking every day after work, and it's like, you want to be nice, but like also not do that. And then like even within the SDA church, like how to keep Sabbath, some people are super conservative, some people are like super liberal. So we're just kind of throwing out things that we're thinking of, if you have anything off the top of your head.
Mental health,
What do you mean by that?
like suicide.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, that's been.
Because like, so somebody committed suicide at Southern, and they didn't do a memorial service for them. So a lot of students were really upset about it.
They were like, why do they not do a memorial
So
service?
the reason why they don't do it for people that commit suicide is because oftentimes they've done research, and it shows that like when they hold a memorial service for somebody who's committed suicide, it promotes other people to follow in the same footsteps because of the recognition that they receive.
For like attention seeking, you mean?
So they've done it at Andrews, though. They've given memorial services.
Yeah.
Suicide.
They did do a small little thing. I mean, Southern didn't do it, but like the people that were close to the person held a little service that were just for the people that were close to the person.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But there was a lot of discussion about that. So it's controversial.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. I guess that kind of goes into like euthanasia, which is a form of suicide, like physician-assisted suicide. We can put that down.
That's true.
There's especially like the rise in technology and all sorts of new ways to be corrupt. I feel like in our generation, there's a lot more things to have ethical dilemmas over than there used to be, and they're more publicized and more vocal and more coverage on it than there ever used to be before, if that makes sense. We're not obviously going to talk about all of these and like get to the bottom of all of them, because that'd be like really long. But my point in like going over this is just kind of like to bring to our attention like how much is like going on in the world today, and like realize like as Christians, we're just facing a lot. There's a lot of scrutiny, like especially on Christians today. Because there's like this whole new like tolerance movement. Well, this isn't new, but it's newish. Like the whole "don't judge me," like you do your life this way, I'll do my life this way, kind of like an influx of like a relativistic morality, like where there's no absolute truth anymore, and it's like I'm gonna do me, you do you type of mentality, like no one can judge me type of attitude. Does that everyone kind of feel like that's kind of like the social climate that we're kind of in? Yeah, and it's really hard because as Christians, like you want to hold true to your beliefs and your convictions, but at the same time, like people who look at you think, oh well, you're judgmental and you're hate speech and all of that for keeping what you believe in, and so just kind of want to talk about, just kind of discuss like what you guys' thoughts are. I'm gonna put this down for a second. I'm tired of holding it. So like what you guys think about what that looks like. Like if so, we'll just pick one scenario. Like you had posed on the Facebook group. Like what do you do if you have a homosexual friend that invites you to their wedding? Homosexual wedding. Like what do you do as a Christian? We're not gonna get into like whether you think it's right or wrong, but like the typical Christian standpoint is like, we believe that's wrong. Like, do you go? Do you not go? What are your reasonings? Like, just kind of want to do like a discussion about it. So, anybody have any preliminary thoughts about it? What to do when you're faced with ethical dilemmas?
I guess the reason I have that question is not necessarily because it's happened quite yet, but I do have friends that are in the LGBTQ community that not necessarily support, but I tolerate. They're, everybody's a person; they deserve love,
Right.
and it's not something I presume to discriminate against. But if that were to happen, if somebody, if one of my close friends decides to find love in another man or another woman, where do I stand, and how do I stand my ground?
Yeah.
Necessarily.
So the balance is you want to like hold true to your convictions, not feel like you're compromising, right? But on the other hand, you don't want to be judgmental or make people feel ostracized or that you hate them or whatever, right? So there's a balance. So we're trying to figure out like what that looks like. And what you said was interesting is like you said you tolerate it. Right? I feel like the meaning of tolerance has really changed over the years. In the past, tolerance means like what it means. In order to tolerate something, you inherently have to disagree, right? Like if I don't like apple pie, but someone gives me a piece and I eat it, like I'll tolerate it and I'll eat it, right? So like there's an inherent like I don't agree with this or I don't like it, right? But tolerance has now changed to mean that you have to agree and accept it. So like if I say as a Christian I'm against homosexuality, someone will call me intolerant, right? And I'm like, no, but like in order to be tolerant, you have to inherently disagree. So tolerance now has changed, like the meaning of it. So no longer can you disagree or think it's wrong. You have to like accept it, and that's like a whole new social climate that makes it really tricky, because I'm seeing that it's hard for a lot of people to understand. Like I can disagree with your lifestyle, but still like call you a friend or still like treat you kindly, or you know what I mean, or still advocate that you not be discriminated against, or treated unfairly. While still maintain like a different set of convictions, so just out of curiosity, like I'm kind of curious to see like how many of you would go, how many of you wouldn't go, like just your gut instinct.
I feel like I wouldn't go. Like, not that, like,
I would
I
send
wanna-
them a present.
I would do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I would send a wedding gift, but
You'd send
I
a
wouldn't
gift.
necessarily attend.
Okay.
Yeah.
not because, like, I hate them or, or anything like that, but, like, I feel like there has to be a balance too. Like, if I go, it's saying that I'm, like, okay with, like,
Yeah.
the union that they're making. But yeah, like, I
Like you'd
send
be
it.
supporting it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You guys would feel like you're supporting it, and, if you don't agree with it, then you shouldn't support it, just like you wouldn't support any other cause that you would not agree with, or did not, you had convictions against, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Does it change your answer if the person inviting you is like a family member, like if it's your brother or sister?
I don't think that would change. Because I've always, we've been grown up to believe that marriage is a union under God between a man and a woman. And if that's what, God has established in my heart, I just have to follow through with it. And it's kind of rough. It puts you in a tight spot because,
Because they're
you're with a
family.
close friend or with a family member.
I know a lot of people would say, or I'm just spouting off things I've heard, like you know, it's not worth sabotaging a relationship or like cutting this person off or creating like a rift between a family, you know. You know, and it's hard too because like, you know, also in the Bible it says like, if you put your family, your mother or father before me, then you're not worthy of me, you know. So it's like, okay, so we see like we have to be loving like Christ, but we also have to like have strict standards too. So it's like, okay, where's the balance? So I just have some text to look at in the Bible. I'm not saying I have like answers to every life problem, obviously, but just kind of to look at some things. Does everyone have Bibles or phones or something of that nature? Let's see. What do I want to read first? Now, some people I've talked to who said that they would be in favor of going to like a wedding. They say like, oh well, you know, Jesus hung out with sinners all the time. You know, we're called to be like Jesus and not judge people because, you know, if you judge people, then they're not gonna, you know, people aren't won by being judged. They're won by showing love. And so, one of the things I want to look at first is, let's look at Matthew 7:1-5. Does anybody want to read it?
I can read it.
Let's see, Matthew 7:1-5. Anybody?
Ready? Okay. It says, judge not that you may be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs...
Oh, you can stop.
Oh, okay.
Right, so if you look at this section, you're like, okay, well, you know, Jesus is saying don't judge, so like, is it my place to like say this person's wrong or like not go? But one of the things, you know, like I was saying, like the whole comment of like don't judge me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to look at the word judge and like what exactly that means. What do you guys really think it means to judge somebody?
I think it, like, to take it upon yourself to tell them what's right or wrong.
Yeah,
And
that
what
they
do.
are wrong in doing certain things. That's not your place.
I think as a society we confuse the word judge with condemn, and there's a big difference. You know, we can't live our life without making judgments because you have to. Like, you know, you look at two cars, you have to judge which one you're gonna buy. You know, you have kids, you have a babysitter, you're gonna judge between the candidates and be like which one's gonna be the safest for your child. Like, you have to make judgments, right? You have to look at, am I gonna do this decision or that decision? Which one's the best choice? Like, you have to judge between things, right? And so like the word judge, I feel like has taken on a negative connotation in society today. And so people say, don't judge me. And it's like, well, you know, actually, like, I'm supposed to be able to judge, because like that's what, and God gave me a brain, I'm supposed to make choices. But what we're not supposed to do is like condemn, right? Condemning is saying, what's the difference between judging and condemning?
Condemning is like telling them that they're like, gonna go to hell.
Yeah.
Well, the Pharisees are a good example of like
Yeah.
what condemning looks like, right? You know, they're constantly putting people down and saying like, you know, they're putting themselves in the punisher role, like as if they're God and they're superior to them, you know, versus like if you're doing something, I don't know, let's say you're about to go shoplift from a store, I don't know, okay? Like, it wouldn't be condemning for me to say, hey, Kaylee, like, I really don't think you should do that, but you could be like, hey, don't judge me. You're like, well, like, that's actually fair for me to say that's wrong, because it actually is, you know, but, like, condemning would be like, you know, you're a bad person, and, like, you're gonna, like, you deserve to be punished, blah, 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 you deserve, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
one's, like, judging the action, judging is the action, and condemning is the person. Does that make sense? Kind of like last week we talked about the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is over the action of what you did, and shame is like feeling I am bad versus what I did is bad. Does that make sense? So let's look at a different verse to kind of counteract this one. It's Ezekiel 3:18. So this one says, do not judge. We could kind of change that to do not condemn. Let's look at Ezekiel. Where is Ezekiel? It's next to Daniel.
And Lamentation.
Yeah, Ezekiel, Daniel.
What?
Ezekiel 3:18.
Okay, I got it.
You wanna read it loud?
Yes, ma'am. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way, to save his life, that same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand.
Let me read it in my version too. And this is God speaking to Ezekiel. So when he say when I, it's God saying I. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to them to dissuade them from their evil ways, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. And that's like pretty like, whew.
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay. Like so like in my example of like Kaylee, like you're gonna go shop from a store. If I'm just like, I know you're gonna do that, I'm like, okay, well, have fun. Like, you know, like you do it and I knew about it and I could have like talked to you. Like I'm also being held accountable for that.
Right.
You know, and it's like this
So
is
it's like saying like it's your right to judge, like, or like tell them.
No, to tell, to hold your convictions, and show others, isn't it?
this is just again contrasting the
Yeah.
judging and versus condemning.
Mhm.
Like a better translation I feel like of the Matthew one would have been do not condemn, because like we're all sinners, right? We've all sinned. So in order to say, for me to say like, oh well, your sin's worse and like I'm better than you because you sin differently than me, like that's like the Christians that are condemning homosexuals, like that's not okay. Like for you to say like, oh, you're gonna go straight to hell because I'm like, well, you've also sinned too.
Yeah, just
like,
in a different way.
It's just a
Yeah.
different type of sin. Like all sin is sin. Like, you know, it might like
There's
look
no
worse.
levels.
Right. Humans make levels out of sin, but like a lie is, you know, just as bad as like homosexuality.
Mhm.
And like what's funny is that people are quick to condemn homosexuals for having, you know, homosexual sex. But they're quick to bat an eye at like heterosexuals having sex out of marriage. And I'm like, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this one in Ezekiel is saying like, hey, you know, you're supposed to like help people and make judgments between right and wrong and like help guide that person back, which is completely countercultural. You know, people are like, don't judge me, you know, I'm gonna do my thing, you know, like no one can judge my life, you know.
Mhm.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something. No? Okay. So these two verses are like, oh man, like if you read them, like it's easy to get confused what to do. But it's important to, you know, remember that condemning is different than judging. Let's look at another one. It's going to be a kind of long, so we can just kind of stop in sections, but I kind of want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and chapter 6, because, Shanice, did you read it? Have a chance to read it?
Yes, I did.
A lot of it really has to talk about like what we're talking about right now. And it's hard to just pick out a single verse because you want to read the whole thing in context. But we can stop and discuss along the way, so you don't have to read the whole thing all at once.
1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians 5 and 6. Okay, so giving some context, this is written by Paul. He's, you know, writing to churches, so we're dealing with believers here. Or, you know, church people. And the specific situation he's addressing is there's a case of two people in the church that are having incestual relationships. So that's where it picks up with 1 Corinthians 5. Does anyone want to start? And we can just kind of read and then chat and then read and chat.
I can start.
Go ahead.
It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that is not tolerated even among pagans, for a man has his father's wife, and you are arrogant.
Hold on a second. If a man has his father's wife, what is that person to him?
Stepmom.
Dang.
It's his mom or his stepmom.
Yeah,
It doesn't say if it's his mom or stepmom.
yeah.
Either way,
I like
Yeah.
that. Another translation.
huh?
What does it say?
Yeah, it's in another translation, New Living Translation. So this version says, I can hardly believe the report about the sexual immorality going on among you, something that even pagans don't do. I'm told that a man in your church is living in sin with his stepmother, and it's Greek for father's wife.
Yeah, it could be mom or stepmom. It doesn't specify, but either way, it's like okay. Go ahead, keep going, Kaylee.
It says, ought you not rather to mourn? Let him who has done this be removed from among you. For though absent in body, I am present in spirit, and as if present, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such thing. When you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of the Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. So, like, there, it's like saying, like, you need to condemn them? No.
It's,
Where?
I wouldn't say it's condemning them, but it's like, hey, this person's living in a way that even pagans don't live like,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he's saying, like, your life is not consistent with a believer. It's not even consistent with, like, the furthest thing from a believer,
Right.
right? So clearly something's, like, in the heart is not
Mm-hmm.
transformed, not, you know, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like,
But it says, like, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord.
yeah, I've actually, like, asked a lot of people about this verse, and it's kind of unsure what that means.
Yeah.
So we don't have to, like, get stuck
Okay.
on that one, because, like, I've tried looking into that specific verse,
Mm-hmm.
and I have no idea what it's talking about.
6. Okay, I'll keep reading.
But, yeah, you can keep going.
Your boasting is no good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven and leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.
So go ahead and pause there. I don't think anyone was here besides Shanice. What do you notice about what she just read, that what we've talked about before? Were you here for the Passover one?
No, I wasn't here for Passover.
Okay. Dang it.
It's like kind of like saying, like, one bad person can, like, kind of shape the whole group in a sense.
Yeah.
It's
or
like a
make
bad
it bad.
apple.
Yeah.
Where?
Yeast.
Bad apple.
1 Corinthians 5:6. It says, don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as you really are. In a previous week, we talked about, like, how Jesus was talking about the yeast of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees' whole thing was about you're saved by works, right? And then he was talking about in the Passover, when they fled from Egypt, to not use yeast in their bread as they were leaving Egypt, because the yeast is representative, like, of a works mentality. And so, like, he wanted them to flee from Egypt quickly and not stay in their bondage of slavery. And so, like, the metaphor of, like, not using yeast in their bread was, like, it's not based on your works. You know, I'm setting you free from bondage so you can go into the promised land and be set free. So I just find it interesting that it's in here again, saying, you know, get rid of the old yeast so you may be a new unleavened batch as you really are. And like Kaylee said that, you know, it can ruin the whole batch. Because you have to remember, like, our lives as Christians, like, isn't just for us, but, like, we're supposed to be a light shining to the rest of the world, right? So if the rest of the world is looking at you saying, like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but, you know, they're like, but you're living in a way that's worse than pagans. You know, it's like, why would we want to have anything to do with that? You know, like, that's like, you're not just putting your reputation at stake, but you're putting God's reputation at stake. Saying like, God really doesn't transform lives. Like, it's just like these rules that we keep, it's just based off behavior and, like, keeping it hidden, and really it's just like, oh, well, maybe all Christians really just keep their bad behavior hidden. You know, like, it's not that they actually are transformed. They're not really, you know, a new creation. They're just acting. Does that make sense? So, like, that's really, like, a big deal too. So it's, you know, how we treat believers should be a little bit different than how we treat unbelievers when it comes to, like, this kind of stuff. I forget where it says this in the Bible, but it said people that are believers are held to a higher standard than the people that are unbelievers, because they're not, unbelievers have made no statement of faith. They have, I mean, they're in sin, right?
They don't know.
Yeah.
Too.
They
Like,
don't know.
They don't know.
Like, premarital sex, like, that's not a thing that people even think is wrong, like, outside of, like, any type of faith, right? So, like, that's considered normal and acceptable. Like, that's not even considered bad. Like, things like murder are, you know, are bad, but, like, premarital sex is like, oh yeah, that's just something people do. You know, so they should not be held to the same standard as a believer that says, like, you know, I abide by the things that, like, Christ is saying. So, like, how I would treat someone, like who's living in sin like that, like if I have an unbeliever friend who's like sleeping around with her boyfriend, you treat them completely different than like a believer who's like sleeping around with their boyfriend. You know, like if Kaylee came to me and said, you know, like forgetting the shoplifting scenario, but like that you're like, hey, I'm moving in with my boyfriend and, you know, we're not going to get married, but we're just wanting to do this. And I'd be like, I would, you know, it'd be bad for me and wrong for me not to say anything to her, you know, because like she claims to be a believer. She's not just putting her reputation, but like also God's reputation. And like for me to just stand by and do nothing as she's like, you know, like if you see someone in trouble, you know, going down a wrong path, like it's out of love to actually help bring that person back. It's not condemning or judging to help that person. You know, you can do it in a loving way. But if she was an unbeliever, you know, I'm not going to like tell her, oh, you shouldn't do that. Because she'd be like, why? You know, like that's not my job. That's God's job, you know, to convict that. Anyway, sorry, I just went on a little rant there. Let's go on verse 9.
Sorry.
You don't have to. Someone else
Okay.
can. We're on verse 9.
I wrote to you in my letter not to associate sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy and swindlers, or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, and idolater, hater, or slanderer, a drunkard, or swindler. Do not even eat with such people.
Yeah, that's like a pretty bold statement, and that actually kind of is what I just talked about. Like the very first sentence, it says, I wrote to you not to even associate with sexually immoral people. But then he like gives like a little caveat. Not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral. In that case, you'd have to leave this world. But I'm writing to you that you will not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister that's doing that. So again, it's pointing out that there's got to be like a difference of like expectation and standard for believers and unbelievers. Like, cause you know we're called to. So what's that verse? We're live in the world, but not of it. I don't know where that is. It's in there somewhere. Like it's impossible to not live in the world. If we were just be like, oh well, I'm not gonna hang out with any sinners. Like. What are you gonna do? Live in your house, or like, and be a shut-in, like, you know? But like, it comes back to like, when you associate with, you know, Christians that say like, hey, I'm born again, transformed, a new creation, and they're still living in a way that like is consistent with a non-believer or even a pagan. It's like, what are you saying about who God is? Like, what are you saying about like His ability to actually transform lives? And like a lot of people will look at this verse or this cluster of verses and be like, whoa, you know, that's too much, that's too harsh. But I'm like, but is it? Like, you know, it's not saying don't hang out with people that are unbelievers, because I mean that's how you share the gospel, and like no one is won over through judgment, right? Like if Kaylee, if you're a non-believer, you know, you never accepted Christ or whatever, and you're, you know, living with your boyfriend, me coming and knocking on your door and be like, hey, you shouldn't be sleeping with your boyfriend, you're gonna be like, why? Right? You know, that's not going to win you over. So, anyways, and the very next, I'll just read it. The very next verse, verse 12 says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you. So yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. And I feel like this is a really helpful like foundation for what to do with a lot of these moral dilemmas. So like, I feel like a lot of Christians get really upset about the state of like the world or politics, or like, oh, these new policies. They're like, oh, they're, you know, they're so bad. I'm like, well, they're worldly policies. Like, what do you expect? Like, do you expect the world to have Christian morals and policies? Like, no. Like, you can't be, I mean, you can be mad, but like, you can't really be mad when like a worldly system comes up with worldly policies. Like, you know, like, there's nothing you can do about that because that's just how it is. But what you can, want to change is like if within the church or within like a Christian whatever, if there's policies that don't match Christian standards, that's something to be like actually upset about. Like, I don't know, if Southern or the world, what's it called, the main
Conference.
Thank you. Gosh, the conference like made some rule, I don't know, that was completely like anti-biblical and like worldly. That would be something to actually be upset about versus like if like the government as a whole made something, because like the expectations should be different. Like when you see the world making these policies that are like completely anti-biblical, you're like, okay, well, we expect that. Not to say that you shouldn't care, but like to like set your expectations and understand like attacking worldly people with like biblical, like you shouldn't be doing that. Like it's not gonna. There's not you know what I mean. There's not like any kind of connection there.
Yeah, I feel like they're not gonna understand, like,
Because all they hear is judgment and hate. They don't hear like the heart of love coming through, being like, hey, you shouldn't do that because it leads down this bad path. They don't understand that like when you're sleeping around with your boyfriend, like, and you're not married, that like you're creating a soul tie and it's like carrying you down a road that's gonna be really painful. Like they just hear, oh, you're being really legalistic and judgmental. It's like, no, like I'm trying to help you because I care about you. So people think it's anti-loving to like judge someone, but really like if I don't care about Kaylee at all, I'll just be like, okay, well, she can live her life. I'm just gonna stand by and let her do her own thing. But if I really care about you, I'm like, hey, maybe not do that. You know what I mean? And so like we're kind of like
in
paralyzed.
a nice way.
Yeah, no,
Because
for
there's,
sure.
like, some people are just like, you're gonna.
Yeah.
or
Well, there's
something.
definitely right and wrong approaches. Like coming at people like smacking the Bible in their face probably isn't the best. And the best way I feel like is in the context of having a relationship with someone. So like I'd feel comfortable coming up to Kaylee or like Shanice because like we have a friendship, like. But I'm not gonna go up to someone I don't know and be like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, because they're gonna be like, well, who are you? They don't know like who I am, So that's really important, like having a basis of relationship, and that's what we see Jesus did. Like he modeled that. Like that's the whole thing. Like Jesus spending time with sinners. Like people aren't gonna care about like what your policies and like regulations and rules are until they know how much you care. I think there's
that, like, they look at like your character and like
yeah.
I feel like if you
They-
really are like following Christ, like they're gonna see the difference in you and they're gonna wonder like, oh, I wonder why she's like that.
Yeah.
And then like
Exactly.
actually delve into it.
One of the things I want to look at after we finish this one, I don't want to get off. Actually, let's just finish this and then we'll go into that. Let's just finish chapter 6. Anybody want to read? Do they want me to read?
I can read.
Okay, verse 1.
When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare to go law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try tribal cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church?
That's
I
good.
say,
That's actually as far as I wanted to go.
okay.
This actually just kind of points back to the point that like judging is a good thing. Like not condemning. We're not talking about condemning, but like judging is like super important and like what we're actually called to do. It says in verse 2, do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? We know that like at the end of time when we're called, into the 1,000 years in heaven, the books will be opened and we'll be going over the books or whatever. And it says, do you not know that we will judge the angels? The fallen angels and whatnot. Like we're supposed to make moral judgments. We're human beings with the ability to choose between right and wrong and make discernments and judge like, okay, this is good, this is not good. To not ever judge anything, like we would just be blindly and ambiguously just like selecting things.
Hey,
Go ahead.
Elizabeth wants to maybe come. Is she okay?
Yeah,
Or is-
anybody can come.
No, she's like, maybe it's like the end, but
I mean, we can talk as long as we want to talk. Like, I don't have a cutoff time. Like, 8 o'clock, everyone out. No. We can talk and discuss as long as we want to. Anybody have any thoughts about anything we've just read or discussed so far? Or any questions or anything? No? Okay. Let's go on then to, I was talking about before, like, how Jesus was spending time with sinners and, like, how people kind of say, oh, well, since Jesus did that, then, you know, we should also, like, you know, like, support, you know, like, go to the friend's wedding or, like, thus and such, right? Because Jesus was loving. I feel like there's a spectrum, and either extreme is bad, right? The point where you're too loving, that you have, like, no backbone and no convictions, and you're just compromising everything. And then the other extreme, it's like you value the rule more than the person, you know, and you value, like there's no grace and mercy at all, you know,
No,
like,
you have to have like
there's a balance. Right.
and not go to one extreme or the other.
Right.
I feel like he showed it a lot with like the woman at the well, and then like the woman who was like adultering, like he would say like, you know, I love you, but what you're, like this and this is what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna like condemn you, but you know, like this is what you're doing wrong, and like but I'll still love you. Either
Right,
way,
it's like,
you know?
where are your condemners? Is that a word?
Yeah.
Condemners? Neither do I condemn you.
Yeah.
Go and sin no more. But she could, like, see the love in his eyes,
Exactly.
right? That's what won her over. But he said, go and sin no more. He's not making
Right.
an excuse and, like, what's the word? Enabling her to keep doing it.
Exactly.
What I was going to look at is Matthew 7. Matthew 7. Verses 1 through 5. Oh, wait, no, we just read that. I lied. I meant Mark 2, sorry. We just read Matthew 1, or 7. Mark 2, 15. My bad.
And it came to pass that as Jesus sat and met in his house, many publicans and sinners sat also together with Jesus and disciples, for there were many, and they followed him.
Yeah, so this is just saying, you know, like, Jesus was having dinner with the tax collectors and sinners, and they were eating together. And people use this verse to be like, we'll see, like, Jesus hung out with sinners, and therefore, like, we should go out and do the same thing, too. But something I'd like to point out is, like, what is the activity that they're doing together?
Eating.
Right, is there anything morally questionable with that activity? Just having dinner, right? Right, so it doesn't say that, you know, like, Jesus was friends with tax collectors, he was friends with prostitutes, he was, you know, all sorts of people. Does it say, like, he went with them to the bars, you know, or does it say, like, he went with the prostitutes to, like, their,
No.
where do people meet? On street corners? I don't know.
Brothels.
Brothel, that's the word I was looking for. I was like, what's the word? But, like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus is having a dinner, and he's inviting these people to his home.
Yeah.
Right, so these people are ones that have felt like,
You're
did it start over?
Stop.
Oh, I'm so mad.
Who did they call him?
Huh?
Who did they call
Let me
him?
see what happened. Oh, no, it's still going.
Fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
whew.
Okay.
I was about to be like, Elder, you ruined everything. Someone text Elder for me.
Yeah, just call him or text him.
Just text him.
Yeah.
Tell him, tell him it's
Okay.
fine.
He usually watches me like, Elder, you ruined everything.
I'll tag him in this part. Yeah, so it doesn't say that Jesus, or, you know, what was I saying? These people, they've been the outcasts of society, right? They feel judged by the Pharisees, most likely. They're the religious people. So, like, in our day, that'd be, like, probably, like, transgender, homosexuals for sure. They feel super ostracized and, like, criticized by the Christian church, right? So it's not saying that Jesus didn't go with these people to, like, their life of sin, but he brought them to his home, right? He had dinner with them, something that, like, is including and welcoming and saying, hey, like, I value you as a person, you know, and that's what makes people really feel like, okay, you really care, like, you're investing in me, right? So, like, I feel like people take this and, like, kind of run with it too far. They're like, oh, well, see, Jesus hung out with sinners, so therefore, like, we should be loving and, like, go and, like, it doesn't say Jesus ever went anywhere that was, like, morally questionable, because Jesus had an upstanding reputation and, like, he was representing God, right? You know, like, that's literally what we are. We're no different than Jesus in that sense. We're all sons and daughters of God, and they say that Jesus was the Son of God, right? So like, bring that to today's context, like if in the case of like the homosexual person inviting you to their wedding, I don't see anything, like unless you guys have something else to say, like I don't see any biblical evidence that would say like that Jesus would go with that person to that life of sin, but that he would like make sure that person knew that like he loved them and like invite them to their home, not make them feel ostracized or like condemned or like you can't hang out with us. Does that make sense?
What about the idea that like, I know that when I was younger, like, a lot of people would say like, oh well, if you go to the theaters and stuff,
Yeah.
like the angels will stay outside. And like, God's not gonna go in there with you because
Yeah.
like he doesn't believe in that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, that's
I feel like if the angels like left, like Satan would just take over you.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
well, see, God isn't afraid to go in sin because
Yeah.
he came to the world. So like he's not afraid stepping to a movie theater.
Yeah.
But first of all, there's nothing wrong with going to the movie theaters. One, I mean, what you're watching is
You can
more
watch it.
important than
Yeah.
the location.
Yeah.
Like my thing is, if you're against movie theaters, like, are you okay with watching movies at your home then? Because like,
Yeah.
is it the location of a theater that's
Yeah.
evil, or is it movies that are evil? Because
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
so you can't watch Prince of Egypt at the theater,
but
but you
can
can watch
But
Prince
you
of
can
Egypt
first-
at home.
Yeah.
Okay. What were you gonna say?
The context when that was written was where there was prostitutes living above the theater houses.
I mean, but still, it's not.
Well, I mean, in the idea that like when you sin, it separates us from God.
Yeah.
Like we are putting ourselves in a position where we are stepping away from God. And so I think like the idea is like when you step into a place where you're purposely going there for the purpose of sinning, like you're saying, angels, wait here, I don't want to be with you because I
Right.
don't want to be with God right now. I am stepping away from God.
Yeah.
Like,
But
and so,
like, do the angels really stay like out there? Like, I thought like, I thought that like, if at any point like God or like the presence of your angels weren't there, like it was like if Satan had the opportunity to just kind of like embody you, pretty much.
Well, let's talk about this. When you become a born again believer, what happens? Like, what actually happens?
I mean,
You're renewed.
Where does
You
God?
receive
You receive what?
grace.
And
Um,
what happened at Pentecost? The gift of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Sorry. But like, you know, when Jesus died, you know, he basically like was saying there is no longer any more separation between you and God. Like people used to have to go to the temple to worship God, right? That's where God's presence was. When Jesus died, Jesus was the bridge. You've seen like the drawings of like the cross over like the gap and like us going to, you know, and like when Jesus died, the veil was torn from top to bottom between the holy place, you know, the most holy place and like the rest of it, right? And the sacrifices there stopped. And it says that no longer is God's presence there in the temple, but we are the temples of the Holy Spirit. Right, so the Holy Spirit literally is living inside as in a born again believer. There is no more separation anymore. We have like a union with Christ. Like that doesn't go away. And so like Jesus lives there, like just like he lived in the presence of the temple. So like wherever you go as a born again believer, Christ goes with you, right? You can't like, no matter where you go, you're never alone. You're never like, Christ is never checked out at the door. It's like, oh, well, you walked into a bar or a club. I'm just gonna wait outside. Like he's living inside, right? Like with people that aren't believers, like that's a whole other story. Like they don't have the Spirit inside of them, right? They're not born again. They're still of the flesh, right? So like Christ is a gentleman. Like he knocks. Like he doesn't ever barge in. He stands at the door and knocks, and like if anyone will let him in, he will. But like if they say no, like don't come in, like he'll be like, okay, it's your choice. Like he honors our choice, right? So if like a non-believer is going into a club or whatever, and they like, and their conscience is saying like, hey, maybe don't do that, and they're like, no, like Christ, you know, he's a gentleman, he'll back off and be like, okay, it's your choice, you know, like he can stand back and let consequences happen. But like anyone who like,
choose that.
Yeah, like you choose, like when you choose, you want Christ inside you. Like he goes with you everywhere. Like that's where his new dwelling place is. So like we never have to be afraid. Like, oh well, what if I make a wrong decision and like I go do this thing and like Christ doesn't want to go there, so he just leaves me. Like that's not a thing anymore. So that's really comforting. Like knowing like you have a new spirit. Like you have a new heart. Like and that's where Christ lives in you, and you're never like alone. You never have to be afraid of like his spirit departing from you, because that's his new residence, and that's like, that's the beauty of the gospel right there, because they didn't have that before Christ died, like, and they didn't have that same reassurance, because they had to go somewhere to meet God's presence. They had to go to a temple, like, somewhere far away to like encounter God. Like they could pray and stuff, but like it's different than like God's physical presence. So like having the gift, like it really is a gift of like have the Holy Spirit live inside you. Like that's something like that's really amazing. And that's really awesome.
Start silent.
Yeah, that's what we that's kind of like what we've been talking about for like the past like several weeks indirectly, in the context of like temptation and spiritual warfare. Like what happens like when you're being tempted, like what does that mean like on a spiritual level, like when it comes to like the new creation and stuff. Anyways, we've taken a break from that topic. No, it's good. We've taken a break from that topic to like talk about just this, because this is something that Shanice was interested in, which is a good topic too. And now I have no idea what we were talking about. We were on a completely different tangent. Who knows what I was saying? Where are we at, Mark? We were
Mark 2:15 or 16.
Yeah, so just hanging out with sinners and stuff. So just translating it, I try always think of like, okay, this is what they did in the Bible. Like, how can we translate this into our day? So still in keeping, I guess, with like the homosexual scenarios, because it's the easiest scenario. What are some ways that you guys could feel like you could show the love of Jesus, but also like not compromise your standards at the same time? Do you guys have any thoughts? I don't have like an answer. This is a discussion.
I would just really question like what are your intentions? Like either if you're going to go or if you're not going to go, like what are your intentions by doing that action?
Mm-hmm.
Like are you trying to like prove a point? Like so if you say I'm not gonna go, like what are you trying to say, or like what is the purpose behind you not going? Is because you're saying I don't want to support them, and so like I want to like make my statement to them by not going that I don't support what you're doing, or are you going because like you don't feel comfortable being in that scenario? Are you not going because like when you're there, the fact that you're not comfortable, like you're gonna say or do something that's gonna make like ruin their day and like make them feel uncomfortable, make them feel judged, and like kind of ruin the whole vibe of the whole scenario, like, or like, and then if you, just what is like, why are you not going?
Mm-hmm.
I think, because it was talking about how like God judges
The intentions of the heart.
the intentions, right? And so like, what are your intentions by going or not going? You
Right.
know, like if I go, maybe my intentions are to say, hey, listen, like I really do love both of you, right? Like I appreciate the fact that you both exist, and I can express to them before, after, whatever, be like, hey, listen, I don't agree with what you're doing. I don't agree with this union, this way of this idea, but I love you guys, and so I'm here to support each one of you as human beings. Like that's my intention. Like, so I think that's really like what you have to ask in the whole scenario is like, what are my intentions? What is my heart like in doing whatever I'm gonna do?
Right. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I feel like a lot of Christians, again, focus on the outward action or the behavior, which, bringing it back to like the use of the Pharisees, like they were so focused on like regulating behavior, and it's like God's trying to say like, look, behavior is not like the thing. Like you can do the wrong thing for the right reason, you can do the right thing for the wrong reason, you can do the wrong thing for the wrong reason, you can do the right thing for the right reason. Like the action itself is usually like it can be morally benign until it's attached to a motive. Does that make sense? Like for example, if we're strictly looking at outcomes or behaviors, like if Kaylee's walking by and I have my leg out and she trips over my leg, and it was an accident, she's not gonna be mad at me, if you fell, but the result is that you fell and got hurt. Versus like if I tried to trip you but I missed and you didn't fall, you'd be mad, be like, why would you try to hurt me, right? So in one scenario you were hurt, but you're not mad because I wasn't intending to. But in the second scenario, I tried to hurt you but you didn't actually get hurt, you would be upset. So it's not necessarily the action itself, but like the motive behind. Does that make sense? That's why we have different punishments for like different types of murder, like manslaughter versus like murder one. Like one's an accident versus like one's intentional. So like God is trying to like have us scale back from looking at behavior so much and worrying about like, oh, well, is this the right thing to do? Like focusing so much on like, well, what's the best action versus like internally looking at our hearts, right? So like, and I feel a lot of it is fear-based because we're so afraid of like making a sinful choice. But like, if your heart is good and you're like unsure what the best course of action to do is, even if you pick something that's not the best, it's not sin in the sense that like you're purposely trying to rebel against God. Does that make sense? So like I feel like a lot of Christians, like we need to understand like we need to stop having so much fear about our choices, in the sense that like if your heart is good, you've been created new, you have a heart for God, you're aiming towards him, like he will direct you. And like we need to stop being so afraid of like making wrong decisions. So like in that scenario, like you might not know what the best thing to do is, like, oh man, should I go or should I not? But like you're not, the issue isn't like, am I in favor of homosexuality or not? Like, that's not the question. Like, you already know where you stand, right? So it's not like a matter of the heart. It's like, okay, how do I translate this into a way that's good for them? So, like, how to relate this to, like, the new creation.
Yeah, to bring them to Christ, not push them away.
Right. So that's
Yes.
like your new motive is like how this is going to be interpreted by them, rather than worrying like, oh man, am I sinning by doing this? Right? Because like as a new creation, as a born again believer, like your heart is already for God. Like you're wanting to do the right thing. So like whatever you choose, like it's not sinful. Does that make sense? Because you're already like wanting to do the right thing. So God's not going to be like, man, you went to that wedding, like we're done. You know what I mean? Like, and where did I see 6:1 through 12? Hold on, let me see something. I wrote down something. Let me see if I can find it. 6. I don't know if this is it or not.
I feel like there's not like a right or wrong. Like I feel like it depends on like how you feel about it. In a way, like because like I know that like for me like I wouldn't be able to go just because like I feel like I wouldn't. It's like I wouldn't be able to portray like I would just ruin their day, like because I would just be like, oh, okay, well I'm here, and then. And I feel like it wouldn't be as, like, proactive. And I feel like there's no point in me ruining their day just because of a belief that I have and they don't, I don't know. But I get what you're saying. Like, I feel like...
You would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would feel uncomfortable.
And then it would make it awkward
for them. And then it's like, oh, well, Christians are like that. Or, and I wouldn't want them to have that.
I have... acquaintances, like people I have worked with in the past, and I have, gotten along with them, and I have loved them because they are human beings. They're,
right.
Part of my race, part of my, brothers and sisters. We're
right.
all brothers and sisters, and that's what I believe. And but I don't, and she got married to a woman. But see, I wasn't invited, which I felt that in a way, she kind of says, how I, felt, or how maybe I would feel uncomfortable being there, so I was not invited, but at the same time, if it was a family member,
right,
and I love them, and I was invited, I would feel like I would go because I would enjoy that person because they're my family,
Right.
and I enjoy them regardless. And, you know, I would go to love them, because I will still love them. They would still be my family,
Right.
and I would still want to enjoy
Right.
being in their presence. I mean, I don't know, you know, but that wouldn't necessarily mean that I believe that that is right.
Right. So I think like the focus of Christianity, well, it should be, is like not so much focusing on our behavior for like our sake, like, oh, am I doing wrong or am I sinning in this? Because again, we already established like our heart is for God in this matter. We're not deliberating like, oh, am I gonna be on the favor of homosexuality or not? Like we already know where we stand. God knows where we stand. It's now translating, okay, like what's the best way to be others focused as for our behavior? Or like, you know, and so in the New Testament it talks about being a stumbling block, you know, so it's others focused. Our Christianity should always be others focused, you know. I'm just gonna switch gears here real quick. If you notice, a lot of like the social climate is about like our rights, right? Like women's rights, and that's where a lot of like, you know, abortion is like, oh, abortion, is it right or wrong? It's like, oh, well, you're trying to impede our rights, like women's rights, or like same thing with like homosexuality. It's like whether or not it's right or wrong, it's like you're taking away our rights, right? And that's all self-focused. And I just want to read something really quick from 1 Corinthians 6, chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7. And I just want to read this really quick. He's talking to the Corinthian church. He's saying, the very fact that you guys have lawsuits among you means you've already been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers and sisters. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral or idolaters or adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor greedy, blah, 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 nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And then he says, and this is where I love, like, this is where the new creation part comes in. He's like, and that is what some of you were, like, past tense. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. I really like what he says in the beginning. It's like, you guys having lawsuits with each other, like, Christians against Christians, like fighting for their rights or whatever, and it's like saying, why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Because if you look at like the gospel, like it's never about you fighting for your own rights or like what you deserve, but it's always about laying that down for the sake of somebody else. So like that's what Jesus came and demonstrated. Like God has the most rights out of everyone, right? He's never done anything wrong. Like he deserves the best treatment, but he came and set all that down to be like mocked and beaten and whipped and like literally hung up as a criminal, like putting aside all of his rights for our sake, right? And then Paul, he said the same thing, like to the Romans, in Rome I become like the Romans, to the Jews I become like a Jew, in order to best meet the needs of those people, right? So like he's putting aside like whatever he feels like is best for him in order to reach other people. And I feel like that's kind of like a battle in today's society. Like people are so focused on like what we feel is our rights that it blinds us to like how we can serve other people. That's where we get a lot of these like dilemmas, like what to do with abortion. Like it's no longer about like whether or not abortion is right or wrong. It's about like, well, this is my right. Like you see what I'm saying? Like the conversation has shifted from like whether or not abortion is wrong, but like it's about women's rights. You see what I'm saying? And so like again, you can't really expect much, you can't expect that mentality because it's completely selfless, and like, when you're in the flesh, it's completely self-focused. But like as a believer, like you should really examine like, what is my motive behind like demanding my rights? You know what I'm saying? Because that's like the antithesis to like the gospel. Like that's the antithesis of why we're here. Like we're not trying to like claim as much as we can for ourselves. We're trying to like best live our lives for the benefit of other people to make it easiest for them to come to Christ, right? So like Paul's like, hey, if I need to act like Romans in Rome, I'll do that. If I need to act like the Jews in Judea, I'll do that, right?
And I feel like at least with abortion, like there's such controversy. I know that like as Christians, like obviously we don't believe in abortion, but like in a way, like why should I take that right away from somebody else? Like, I mean, like God gives me the liberty to kind of choose my actions, you know?
Right.
Why
Yeah.
should I take that away from somebody
Somebody
else? you
And
know?
that's what I was
They
talking
should
about with like
decide.
worldly government versus like
Yeah.
within the church. Like within the world, like that's kind of like expected. Like people have the right to choose what they do because I mean it's a worldly mindset. But like if in the church, it's different when like the church says it's okay to do it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's different than like when the world says that. So like, does that make sense?
Mhm.
Because it's like the whole unbeliever versus believers thing. You expect the world to act in a different way from how believers are, and there's a different expectation standard. So, yeah.
I think my mind keeps going back to like the question of like how best do I show love in this situation, which leads me to two other questions. One being, well, so like the definition of love in biblical sense is to give, right? And so like how do I give, like what can I give these people in order for me to show them that I value them, right? So like in the scenario of going to this wedding, like is it better to give my presence or give my absence? You know, like what best can I give to them to best show that I appreciate who they are,
Yeah.
to value them. And then the second thing is like if I further like define love, then God is love. And so if God is love, then how through my actions am I going to show who God is? And therefore I have to know who God is, and therefore I have to know, look at Jesus, the life of Jesus, and know how he treated people, and know like the decisions that he made and how he loved people, how he spoke to people, and therefore ask, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? Because whatever he would have done, if I do that, then I'm showing Jesus. And therefore I'm showing love. And so I think it comes down to those questions and like how you would answer those questions. And the best way to be able to answer those questions is to really get to know who Jesus is in the first place. Because I think if you don't have that base of relationship, like it's going to be really difficult to make an educated decision one way or the other, you know. And like I think our whole relationship, or our whole like the idea of like doing right or wrong or judging people, like it's all going to come back to that relationship. Like, do I have a relationship? Do they have a relationship? Because if they don't have a relationship, I really can't judge them, which I'm not ever going to know if they really have a truly relationship or not, you know, other than if they tell me, which is, you know, I guess strong enough basis to make a judgment on their actions, not necessarily on motives, but you know.
I like what you said about like what does this person need, because again, it's tailoring your behavior for their sake rather than focusing on like, oh, what should I do so that I'm doing the right thing, right? Because a lot of I feel like so much of our focus is internal, like what should I do so that I'm okay, right? I don't want to be like on the wrong side of God, right? It's like we've already established like your heart's for God, like you don't have to be afraid of him, like his presence leaving you. So that frees you. That's freeing. Like the gospel is about freedom to be able to like minister to this person to the way that they need best. So again, it's not the behavior that's right or wrong, it's the intention and moral behind it, right? So like you were saying, some person, they might need your presence, they might need your absence. Like Jesus never ministered to people in exactly the same way. Like, you know, in some people he healed people by telling them like, hey, go home, and they're healed, right? Like he didn't even like go to their house because you know, I don't know, like maybe they needed just that test of faith to like trust him in that moment and go home and see it happen. Other people, he like knelt in the dirt and like made mud and like put it on their eyes. You know, other people, like he just gave them a touch. Like he never healed people in the same way because everyone has a unique need. Like the leper, like he's probably never been touched because people are saying unclean, you know, they're afraid of catching the disease. So like he made sure he touched that person. You know, like that was something that person needed. So like his delivery is always different, but it's always the same heart. So like you might deal with one person one way and another person another way. But like what I'm really trying to get at in this is like there should be no fear, like, you know, questioning like your own self, because like that's there's no freedom in that. Like, if you're constantly worrying, like, if you're okay, or if, like, you're in a right place with God, or, like, worrying if, like, this is the sinful decision, this is the good decision. Like, the beauty of the gospel is that it's freedom. You know, it's like, you have been made right. Like the very thing I just had read, like, Paul saying, like, that is what some of you were, sinners, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and the Spirit of our God. He doesn't say you will be justified or you will be sanctified eventually if you, like, you know, follow the sanctification process and you do enough good works. Like, no, he's saying you are, like, as a new creation, like, you are sanctified, you are justified, and, like, having that, like, identity and, like, mindset of being justified and sanctified before Jesus, like, it really frees you to be like, okay, let's put my insecurities about myself aside and focus on how to minister to this person, like, is what Caleb was saying. So, like, and that all comes down to, like, knowing what to do, down to your relationship with that person, right? So if, like, let's say it's like your best friend, you have a lot more wiggle room with that person than you do with, like, someone off the street. Like, I don't know, let's pretend me and Kaylee are best friends, okay? Like, super, we go way back, you know, and, like, all of a sudden, well, I mean, we don't go way back, but like, we've been best friends since we were 7,
Oh, yeah.
okay? And, like, all of a sudden, you're like, you know, I'm dating a woman, and I'm gonna get married to her. Like, it'd be a lot easier, or, like, there'd be a lot more, like, grace in that relationship for him to be like, hey, I'm not gonna go, because we have, like, years of, like, understanding, and, like, you already know where I stand, right? And, like, you're not gonna question, like, you know, does she not care about me anymore? Like, does she not love me anymore by not coming? Because you know, like, this is where I stand, but I still love you, right? But, like you saying, some random person that, like, maybe you're coworkers with them,
Yeah.
and, like, you're starting to get to know them more, and, like, they're starting to develop a relationship, and, like, I don't go, they're like, hey, I reached out and, like,
Yeah.
wanted to include you in this really important thing to me in my life, and you just didn't come, and they don't really know your stance on these things.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of like an insult, a slap to the face, right?
Yeah.
So, like, especially if someone doesn't know where you stand on an issue, like, I feel like it's really important to, like, that they should know why you're not going, you know, but, like, how to do that in a loving way.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those are just my thoughts about it. I don't know if I do have a couple more verses we can look at. They kind of all sort of say the same thing, or similar, but I don't know if you guys want to look at them anyways. Yeah.
I mean, I think in that case of, like, such close friends, you know, I might go, you know, because I might say, you know, like, regardless, because if they already know where my stance is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I may go because my idea is that, like, I want to show that there's grace. You know, like, there's mercy, like, and so, like, my being there is, like, me, in a sense, I guess, forgiving them. Not that they need my forgiveness, but, like, you know, or just to show that, hey, like, there's still acceptance, like, in Christianity. There's still acceptance in Christ, like, for you as people, you know? And so I think that's why it comes back down to, like, why?
Yeah.
Why are you doing whatever you're doing?
Yeah. There's not a right or wrong answer, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's based on that person's specific needs. I went to this one sermon, which was really great, and they talked about, like, what different people need. Like, if there's, like, there's obviously more than 2 camps, but, like, one camp is, like, people that are, like, kind of apathetic and kind of, like, cheap grace mentality, and then the other camp is, like, you know, atheists or whatever, and, like, they're anti-God and, like, don't want anything to do with the church. They're saying, like, you can't approach both these people the same way because they need different things. So, like, the person that's, like, hateful and, like, thinks Christians are terrible and that God is mean, like, they need to hear grace. They need to hear the love of Jesus. They need to hear the gospel, right? They need to be won over with love. Whereas, like, the people over here that, you know, are taking it too far and, like, oh, well, God will forgive me, you know, and then they're just, like, they don't really care. They're just kind of apathetic and lukewarm. They need to hear more, like, truth. You know, they need to hear, like, truth and, like, all that. But, like, you can't take that truth to these people because that's the reason why they've turned their face away. You know, like, you have to approach people differently because it's not all just grace and it's not all just truth. It's grace and truth put together. It's just like faith and works. You can't have one with the other. Like, people are like, oh, well, I believe in God. I'm like, Awesome. So does the devil. Like, do you want a trophy? Like, the devil believes in God.
Yeah.
Like, that's not gonna save him, right?
Yeah.
And then people are like, oh, I've done all the right things, just like the Pharisees. Well, they're not.
But they're not.
They don't know Jesus either.
It has to be
You have to have faith and works. You have to have grace and truth. But like whichever.
But you are not saved by your works.
Right. No. But
Yeah.
works naturally flow out of a
Yeah.
transformed heart. But you know, because
I think that's why it says like you're saved by grace through faith.
yeah,
And I feel like faith means like you believing in God, and if you believe in God, then you're gonna follow like
What
you know,
his laws
character
are.
and like what he stands for.
the works are like the behaviors again, which are like
Yeah.
the fruit. Like we said, if we see fruit in our lives, like talking about like good works, like patience and what are the fruits of the spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, or whatever. And those are the fruits that we're all trying to like have in our lives, the works. But how many of you guys have met a tree that like, you know, is like, all right, produce apples. Like, try really hard to produce apples. Like, the tree doesn't have to try. Like, if the tree is healthy, it'll just naturally produce apples, right? But like, I feel like so many Christians are like so focused on like, okay, I gotta like do this good behavior and this good behavior and this good behavior. They're like straining to produce fruit, but like they're neglecting like the root. You know, like the works will naturally flow out of like grace and faith and like relationship. So, yeah. Good thought.
I feel like people are also too focused on what not to do versus what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, I should not do that, should not do that, should not do that. And then, but like, when you look at like the judgment day and Jesus holding the two groups in his hand, he's like, you guys did these things and you guys didn't do these things, and therefore you're wrong because you didn't do all these good things, but this group is good because they did do things, right? And so, like, I mean, even though they didn't know that they were doing those good things, it's
Right.
like, it's better to be doing good than to not be doing bad.
Right. I mean, an atheist could not have ever broken any of the 10 Commandments. I mean, well, except for like, there's no other God before me. but you know, like they
Or
might not.
Sabbath, I feel like typically.
Well, you know, I'm just saying like they could have never like done a lot of bad things,
Yeah.
but they're still an atheist. Like they still don't believe in God. They could be a really good person.
Mhm.
They could have done, you know, a Christian could have done a lot more horrible things in their life, like Paul. You know, and he did a lot of horrible stuff, but still be in the saved camp versus someone who's lived a good life, whatever that means, worldly standards. I feel like we've kind of like, I don't even know where we are in this conversation now.
I feel like you're gonna like God's gonna judge you for what you know.
Huh?
I feel like God's gonna judge you for what you know.
Yeah,
not,
because
like,
you,
yeah.
it won't judge you. God, I don't think God will judge you for things that you didn't know. Which there is a,
Accountability.
yeah,
For, you know, you're accountable
for what you,
for what you
your
know.
knowledge.
You know you're doing wrong and you still do it.
Yeah.
then
Well, for what you did. Like, because, I mean, Adam and Eve, I mean, they knew it was wrong to eat the fruit. But it was what they did, and then not only did they do the wrong thing, but then they tried to blame it back on God. And say, this is your fault, you know? And I mean, that's one thing that I question sometimes, like, is the sin the fact that they blamed God and didn't take responsibility for themselves? Or was that just a result of sin? You know what I mean?
I mean, we can get all theological.
Yeah, I'm not trying to get into that conversation right now. It's just, you know, it's just an interesting question to pose, you know, like, because I think we oftentimes try to cast our blame back on someone else or something else, right? Like, oh, I did this wrong thing. It's the devil's fault. He made me do it. Well, no, he didn't make you do anything. He put it in you in a position of temptation, and you follow the desires of your own heart, right? Like in James, it talks about how each one of us is tempted according to our own desires. Like we may have good desires, and then then Satan puts us in a position that says, well, if you do this, it'll gratify this desire, but that action is a wrong action according to that desire. Like we all desire to have sex, right? But sex outside of marriage is bad. Sex inside of marriage is good. So that desire
Right.
is
It's not
good.
the action, again,
Right.
it's
the action that
yeah.
results of that desire.
is there anything like, and we can talk about these big topics. I mean, there's not really much we can do about them. You know, like
I don't know. I think in this conversation we could change. You know,
we
the
just
whole
solve the
political-
world. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
political climate.
ultimately, I mean, there's nothing I can really do about legislation about abortion or legislation about gay rights as much as I may want to. So just for a minute, like, I wanted to think about like ethical dilemmas that we face actually in our lives that we actually have control over, like stuff that like we can actually just think about. You just want to take a minute and think about that, and then like speak up as you can think of it. I have to think too. Actually, there was a situation once, and it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal, but it still is. So like I do home health, private duty nursing. So like I sit with a patient and their family for like a given amount of hours. Anyways, it was on the 4th of July, so like I was supposed to work until 7 p.m. But the mom was like, "Oh, you can totally leave early if you have plans, you know, go hang out with your friends or whatever, and just put 7 p.m. and I'll just sign it for you so you can still get paid for being here." And I was just like, my first reaction was like, "Oh, sweet," like, and then I was like, "Oh, wait," you know, I was like she knows I'm Christian, right? And like, you know, she's seen me with my Bible, like, you know, and like she knows, and I was like, it would not, I mean, how would that look for me to be like, "Oh yeah, sure, let's just cheat so I can get more money," you know, like that's an example, like that's something I actually can change or do something about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I can't really change abortion, you know, I mean I can decide whether or not I have one, but like I can't as a whole. You guys have anything you can think of?
Mostly everything is how you react to certain situations or how you act, how you take things. And all the topics not really changing because you can't change everybody's mind, like you said.
So you mean
You
like
can
how you
only-
act or like your attitude towards people?
Yeah.
Like whether or not you
Yeah.
agree or disagree?
Yeah, and show love in that because you don't want to condemn people and make them not draw closer to God, but actually draw them away from Him because, I mean, I've seen that, and that's.
I think Facebook is a great place to start as far as like how you react to people. How many like political rants have you guys seen on Facebook?
No, that's ridiculous.
I'm like, I don't know. I have to start unfollowing people because like I just see political rants all the time. People like literally saying, "Well, if you voted for Trump, unfriend me," and I'm like, okay, like, you know, like that's just like people are like, "Well, I don't want to be your friend if we disagree," or you know, I'm just like, wow. And I'm like, how many people do you guys know that like have changed their mind from like a Facebook argument? Like, you know, like people post like all these like their stance on like this issue and they rant about it. How many people are gonna read that and be like, "Oh, you know what? Like, I have a change of heart." You know, like that never happens, right? But like, you know, like that never happens. Like, and so, but people keep doing it, and it's just creating more rifts. Facebook was supposed to be like made to draw people together, but it's really just tearing people apart.
I spend a lot of time on Facebook, don't you?
No, like
'Cause I
actually,
don't see none of this.
Oh my
'cause I don't
gosh.
spend any time on
I don't know. Like my home
I
feed
feel like
is
I
just
open it and it's
blown
like
up.
political stuff, and
See,
I'm
I
just
don't even
like,
look through the
okay,
feed.
bye.
I just like my
Yeah.
notifications, click, okay, people's birthdays and invites, and I'm done.
Well, I think the problem is a lot of it's like my like extended family members are all into, so like I see a lot of their stuff and it's just, and I can't unfriend them because they're like my aunt, you know, like I shouldn't have said that. Huh?
You get unfollowed.
I know, yeah. Anyways,
Hide their stuff.
yeah.
I do that. My husband's like, "Did you see?" I'm like, "Honey, I'm your friend on Facebook, but I don't follow you."
That's funny. Another, I feel like the biggest like daily challenge I have is like, it's not so much necessarily gossiping, but like, I guess it kind of is, but like, the people I work with, like I see, like I work in this office, or I work in this home, or I work, I've worked at Erlanger, I've worked, like, different places I've worked, there's always, invariably, there's always, like, people, especially with women, I feel like, sorry,
Yeah.
but, like,
No,
guys don't seem to have this as much.
Over sharing?
Like, they'll just be like, oh, and then just, like,
You what happened?
I feel like, yeah, I feel
yeah,
like,
like, oh, you know what I mean? Talking negatively, but in a way that they don't want to sound like they're gossiping, because then they don't want to be looked down upon. But like, it's hard to explain. But like, little teams form up where like you want to put that person kind of like under the bus so that you look better to this person. But then like to the other person, you'll be like, oh, well, talk about that person so you're like better in front of that person. To that, you know what I'm saying? It's like always trying to like one up, and like it's so pervasive. Like it's literally everyone. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then like people come to me and they're like, oh well, and it's like they're trying to talk to me about like so and so, and I'm just like, I don't know what to say, because I'm just like, I'm not gonna be like, I don't want to be like, oh, can you not gossip about that person, please? Because then it's like, dang, it's like rude, and it's like then they feel like I'm attacking them, which is what I don't want to do. But at the same time, I don't want to just like sit there and listen and engage and then like perpetuate this.
Yeah.
So I'm just like,
What to do?
I don't know. So if any of you have any thoughts, that'd be great. Because I struggle with that a lot. I don't know, like nurses tend to be super.
A lot.
What is wrong with us? Like,
I don't
are
know.
you nurse? Like, there's a lot of nurses.
Honestly,
in this room.
honestly, I had to like.
There's like 4 nurses.
And like everybody has their own way, and they're type A brains.
Yeah.
And they're just like there's no in between, like, this is it, this is, and I think that's a big thing with people in that profession,
I don't know what it is about us. We suck.
because it's just
I think
like,
it's stress.
Maybe.
Because when people are stressed or like
Too
they
many
work too
hours.
much, like you want to be able to share your burdens with other people.
Yeah.
And sometimes like those burdens end up being other people.
Yeah. Transgressions other people
Yeah.
did to you. So it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know, like, if anybody has any thoughts, like, what to do when someone's, like, coming at you and, like, they're venting about another person that's also a coworker, and you're like, okay, well, I don't want to, like, just say, like, don't gossip, you know what I mean? Because then it just makes you look like you're being,
try to just get busy, like, oh, you know what, I'd love to just sit here, but I've got to run and do this. If I don't do it right now, I'll
I
forget.
usually just leave. Like
I will
they'll be
forget.
gossiping.
just walk away. But, like, if it's a one-on-one,
Like, oh,
you
I
can't just...
remember. I'm like, oh, I have to do this.
Because you might be like documenting your activities, and they're at the computer next to you. Like you have to get that done. Because
Yeah,
you can't
I relate
just
to
be-
It's just like someone comes up to you,
No, but
start
like
talking,
I'll
you just walk
literally
away.
log out and like, I have to go. Or, like,
Yeah, it's
I have
really
to go.
hard. Because you want to be seen as, like, someone that people can talk to also. Like, you want to be a good listener and be supportive, but it's also, like, suddenly you're in this, like, turf war.
I gotta go and just offer.
I mean, another thing could be like, you could say like the good things about the person,
actually, that's
and like
exactly what I
maybe
was gonna
tell
say.
them like, oh, maybe she was just having a bad day
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Well,
Like, I
It's
don't
important to
know.
validate though.
Huh?
Because like for example, if someone is upsetting you and someone else is like, oh, they're fine, you're like
You're not hearing me.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well-
no, I think you're right on with affirmation though.
Yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, Kaylee definitely carries her water bottle everywhere. That's annoying, but like she's actually really cool. Like blah blah blah.
Well, and maybe focus on that person's experience and not necessarily the person that they're talking about. Be like, wow, like how did that make you feel or whatever? Because they're trying to vent. Like if they're venting, like then they're talking about their experience. Like they're wanting to express their experience. Whereas like if it's gossip, then they had nothing to do with the situation. They're just talking about somebody else. So I think you gotta define: are they venting, like you said, or are they gossiping and talking about somebody else that they weren't a part
I
of the
feel like
situation?
it is a very fine line, because then, like, like, they're venting about their experience, but then it seems like they're always looking for something that person did to vent about. And it's like something that's like benign that they did. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. And it's like, it's really not even a thing, but they're just like focused on searching for confirmation of like, in order to keep, you know what I'm saying? So it's like a fine line where it's like, I think you may be like overreacting about this, but
Sometimes what I find myself doing personally, in those situations, especially when it comes to nursing, if if they're pinpointing like someone else's flaws, I can relate as to something, oh, maybe sometimes I do that myself. Or I can, share my experiences, so like, you know what, actually I feel like I've done that too. And then that'll go into another conversation as to where we can like just spiral off of something else where it's not targeting that other person. Because nobody's perfect, we're always gonna make mistakes. And in the nursing field, it's like, it can be dangerous to make some of those mistakes. But,
Just to catch Matthew up with what we're talking about, we had made a list of like controversial topics in life that we see in the world. We kind of like went through different scriptures to like what we should do. Like if a gay friend invited you to their wedding, would you go or would you not go? And like the biblical evidence for like what a biblical Christian like behavior would be, like to go and support or to not go, or like the whole judging versus condemning, and like, well, Jesus hung out with sinners versus like Paul saying like if a person even lives in sexual immorality, don't even associate with them, so we were talking about that. And then we're like, okay, well, essentially, like, we can't really change any of these policies, like, because they're bigger than we are. Like, as much as I would love to, I can't, like, ban abortion or whatever, right? So we're talking about in our own lives, like, things that we face that we can actually have control over, and that's where you kind of walked in. Talking about stuff in the workforce.
Sounds like you're talking about gossip, though.
Yeah, because that was something I brought up.
Okay.
Like, I was like, in my life, I experienced that a lot.
Yeah.
And so I was asking people, like, what do you actually face as an ethical dilemma that you can actually do something about? Because we can't really change a lot of these big policies. Like,
Right.
Like, we can sit here all day and come up with the greatest policy for whatever, and it's not going to, we're not in government, so. I mean, I'm sure you have a bunch being what you do. Like, is there anything that you've run into, like ethical dilemmas with your morals and whatnot?
Oh man.
Put you on
That's
the
not on that list. Like.
It doesn't. I mean, it can be. I mean, whatever. The list doesn't matter. Like,
Well, dude, I work with I have really good people. Like, I honestly, like even gossip. People don't even gossip about each other at work. Maybe a hint. Like there's one guy that can be odd sometimes. People get annoyed, but they don't get annoyed in the sense of like typical. Like for example, out of nursing floor, gossiping like is so bad.
yeah. If we were just
So
talking about, like,
bad.
most of us here are nurses.
Yeah. Like half the floor is gossiping about
Someone. Yeah.
or someone, yeah. Whereas, yeah, it's not really like that. I can't think of a specific example that would fit that on the spot.
It doesn't have to be on the
Sure,
list.
yeah.
Just like, I mean, you've talked to me before about like stuff on Sabbath. That could be considered an ethical dilemma too, because
Yeah,
Oh, that's
you
true.
were.
even in the SDA church, like I had said in the very beginning, there's super liberal people that treat Sabbath like no different,
Yeah.
and then there's people that are like, all they do is read the Bible and breathe. So I'm serious. Like, sit here with your hands folded in your lap and like read the Bible all day, like with the long denim skirts. But
What about like working on Sabbath?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
another thing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. And I think I mean, that was a long time ago, but I think I did bump into someone that was like frustrated me for working on Sabbath. And I was kind of like, well, if you get injured, feel free to
Good
call.
luck.
Like, other people will today. I guarantee it.
Yeah, I was like, I had that problem because like, I used to work like Saturdays. Like, I try to avoid it as much as I can, but sometimes like, you just have to work. And then I was told by a pastor that like, working on Sabbath, like I'm sinning and stuff. But like in my mind, I'm just like,
Pastors work on Sabbath all the time.
no,
Every Sabbath.
Like, that's literally their primary day of work.
no,
Well, I'd
it's
be like,
terrible.
Don't have a heart attack on Sabbath, because.
But in my mind, I'm kind of like, well,
we make people work.
there's
Well,
sick
Jesus even
people.
said, "Is it wrong to do good on the Sabbath?" Right?
Yeah.
And I think this ties in
I
with what
feel
Caleb
like-
was saying.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're
go
fine.
ahead.
You're
No,
fine.
you. Where you said like it's the intention. Like if your intention is, oh, well, I'm gonna work all the Saturdays because it's weekend pay and I'm gonna like get more money, so I'm gonna work on Sabbath and just say, well, it's because I'm a nurse and I need to save lives. Like that's probably not the best motivation for working on Sabbath, right? But if you're like, hey, I agree to work some Sabbaths because I understand they get short-staffed or like they might need you and it's like part of my job to do that, that's different than like, oh, well, I'm just gonna use nursing as an excuse to work every Sabbath because I get weekend pay. Like,
I've actually met Adventists that literally do that.
Yeah.
They choose to always work Sabbath because they're like, oh, I suspect it's they don't like going to church.
Yeah.
And so that's where from the pastor's Sabbath.
But you see what I'm saying? Like, the action's the same, but the heart's way different. And, like,
Yeah.
Jesus would look at both actions completely different. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
and then on the flip side, people that are like, I will never work Sabbath. And then, like, they expect special treatment and never have to go in. And they, like, put their coworkers at risk and, like, their patients at risk for not having someone take care of them. For, like, their that's not good either, you know? Because then it's putting, like, yourself above that need that you've committed to. Like, if you didn't like it, you shouldn't have gone into it. You know, so it's like,
Random anecdote.
yeah.
I worked for a Catholic organization for 2 years. Worked 2 Sabbaths. I worked for an Adventist organization for 2 years.
That's funny.
I've worked about 50-something Sabbaths.
Yeah, that's funny. Talking about Memorial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyways,
Interesting.
That's funny.
that's funny. And I feel like, interestingly enough, like if you tell like a Catholic or like a non-SDA organization that you are against working on Sabbath, they're more likely to cater to that than an SDA institution.
Oh yeah.
That's
true.
They're just like, oh, well,
That's true.
all of us are expected to, you know. I'm just
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
Catholic,
But
like,
it's
other,
fair enough because for them they want Sunday off. So like
Yeah.
I always work on Sunday and
Same.
the Sunday.
It works
they'd be
out.
Like, oh sweet, like awesome. You know,
It's
and
just
even
funny.
if you have a schedule, I'd be like, hey Brittany, you wanna switch? Oh yeah, sure.
The problem with my floor is that there's a lot of SDAs there.
Yeah.
Hey, that's where I work right
Yeah,
now.
like
Yeah.
most
Everyone's
of the
SDA,
girls.
Exactly. Everybody wants a Saturday off.
Yeah.
Saturday, Friday off.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But I mean, health and public safety is something important.
Yeah, I mean that's something that you can do later.
Yeah, no, like you
Like-
can't leave somebody to die.
Hey, can you go rob their house later?
Yeah.
Like, come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can you have your heart attack wait for just like 6 more hours?
Yeah.
That's different than like
Yeah, that's
someone that can do their job tomorrow, like
Mm.
writing a newspaper article or
yeah, exactly.
I don't know, what are other jobs? I can't think of any other job. I'm like, what's not healthcare? Oh, waiter, server. Like, yeah, I mean, people don't have to go out to eat necessarily. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you can do that. No one's gonna starve to death.
Yeah,
Like,
like architecture, I don't need to go. To
yeah,
work
you don't have to
every-
be a constructioner. What do you call it?
Construction.
Oh, thank you.
Contractor.
Contractor, whatever.
Solution, though.
You can finish
Yeah.
building that house tomorrow. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
It's not life or
like,
death.
It's not life or death or anything.
Yeah.
What about the calf?
The what?
The calf.
The calf?
I know,
That's a
like,
good point of
It's a
contention,
big,
Southern.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I know a lot of students are pushing to like.
it's
end that.
interesting because, like, when you're at Southern as a student, like, you're kind of stuck there.
Mhm.
And, like, you're not really an adult. I mean, you are, but you're not. And, like, you're kind of dependent on the school to provide things. So, in one sense, like, if the cafe isn't open, people probably won't eat.
There's also
But
a lot of
why
foreigners who
charge
don't
for
have a
it?
car and don't have really means to go off campus and
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
true.
true.
Like, international students, they don't have cars, they can't work because they're on an international visa, so they don't really have
They're not really
money.
set up for having their own kitchen because they don't have a kitchen.
Yeah, so, like, in that sense, it's kind of different because, again, there's not many other options.
but I feel Southern doesn't, like Adventist schools don't make it an option
Make what an option?
because they know they have a lot of international students. They can make like little kitchenettes on,
Well,
I don't know.
I mean,
you can, but the people have to get food for those, and the
Yeah.
issue is that.
I think the
For
issue.
example,
Most-
I know a lot of students from Korea,
Yeah,
and they don't have a car, they don't have the means
Yeah.
to get things from elsewhere to
Yeah.
store in their kitchenette to cook on Sabbath.
yeah.
But they might not
So-
have money
Yeah,
either.
and they don't
Yeah.
really have any disposable income.
They might just have meal plan
Right.
because they can't get a job
Mhm.
in the U.S. to make money. So if it's not on meal plan, they can't get it, and the VM's closed on Saturday.
Yeah.
I feel like the CAF does. Do they use paper plates and stuff on Saturday?
Yes.
I feel like they try. I feel like they usually do something that doesn't require a lot of cooking, like haystacks. At least when I was there, they would have they would just put out chips because it doesn't really require cooking, and then they would just have disposable stuff. They don't really do a lot of work. But yeah, like you know, an ethical question. And again, it's like, what's the motive? Like, are you worried about like you having to like do work on that day, or are you focused on like providing need, or providing to fulfill a need that people have? Like,
I think
you
the
know?
issue was like Southern's like intention of like making a profit out of it, of like
Somehow they don't make a profit in the county.
Yeah, they do.
I'm like, it blows my mind.
they charge so
I
much.
know, there's like
They're just trying to cut even. I think they buy too much food.
And I think they're inefficient in how they.
Yeah.
Since we're on the topic, frustration I've seen 2 Adventist conferences holding an event. like 2 different
Is this what I think
conferences.
it is?
Yep. And they will cater for the event. They're like, oh, we have 800 people coming in. We want everyone to have food. It's on Sabbath. So they cater for the event, but they will pay the people before or after that when they're not breaking Sabbath. And I'm like, the payment doesn't matter. Where in the law does it say this? They're like, oh, well, we're not paying them, so it's fine. No, the people are working on Sabbath.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Frustrates me so. I'm like, if it's like, for example, if Southern did that, I'd be like, okay, someone didn't think about that, or whatever. This is the conference.
Yeah.
They are representing, like, all of the values of the church. Come on, man.
It says do not work. It doesn't say anything about like don't spend money.
There is no mention of payment.
Yeah,
0.
but we focus on that a lot.
Yeah, and people say all the time, we hear all the time, like, oh, I don't buy things on Sabbath. What's wrong with that? Like, what's wrong with buying things on Sabbath?
Let's just take a journey to Exodus real quick.
Exodus 20.
Let me just read it real quick, or
Yeah.
okay. Exodus 20 is the 10 Commandments. Starts in verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
And also do not pay it.
Money is not even mentioned.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
it's
it
not
is.
even mentioned in there. But isn't that funny? Like, it's a part of, like, Adventist culture, almost. Like,
It really is.
where did that come from? I guess they just associate work with payment, like, you know. But yeah.
I think that's like deception that Satan slips into the church. Like little things like that to get people focused on the wrong thing.
To focus on behavior and rules,
Yeah.
yeah, rather than the heart behind things.
Well, and I mean, the big question I think ends up being, are waiters and servers and cooks, are they servants? I mean, they're working.
yeah.
They're
I've had
workers.
this argument with people too. It's like, back in this time was different than now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, they had their Israelite nation or whatever, and like their servants, they were directly in charge of them. So if they said, hey, you're working today, they had to work. Versus if they said, hey, you have the day off, they had the day off, right? So like today, it's different. Like, I have no control over what Karen does at Cracker Barrel. Like, I can't tell her, like, you have to have the day off today. She'd be like, no, I need to work and have money. You know, like, I don't have a say over
You're
what she
still
does.
contracting her to work for you though.
No, yeah, but so like in one sense you can be like, I have no say over what she does. So like in me going and getting food, I'm not forcing her to work, but other people would be like, oh well,
you're enabling.
you're enabling them to work. But it's like, so it's like it's iffy because like the context is completely different. So like, you know, some people would say, well, you know, they're going to be working whether I go or not. You know, and I have no say over what they're doing. Other people would say like, but in you going and paying for them, like they're working for you. So like you've got two things, and so that's I think where that comes from. And like what you think about it, you have to work out with you and God. You know, I don't feel like I would have a hard time saying there is a right and a wrong in that scenario because again, it comes down to like the heart and the motivation. Like, what are you trying to do? You know what I mean?
Trying to eat.
I'm trying to eat. I'm trying to eat.
Well, it's something because like on the West Coast,
Okay,
go to
it's
church and everyone's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's go to
No, there's a
Alpharetta
charge for that.
church.
Yeah.
And like half the church will be there.
Accepting.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I've like wrestled with like Sabbath a lot. My whole life. I was raised SDA. My dad was a pastor, but I went to public school, so it was like weird because like I was a pastor's kid in public school, so like it was just odd because I thought I was like the super spiritual conservative one compared to public schoolers, but then like when I came to Southern, I was like, whoa, people like are way more like conservative than I am, and I thought like I was the conservative one, right? Because like compared to like public school, like it was not, and I didn't even, because since I wasn't in an Adventist environment, I thought like, oh well, how I keep Sabbath is the way that Sabbath is kept, because I had nothing to compare it to, and like oh my dad's a pastor, he would know, you know, and so like when I came to Southern, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a huge vast array of like how people keep Sabbath, and so I was like for the first time I was like confronted with like, okay, so like what's right? And I was like, oh gosh, everything I know is a lie, you know, like trying to figure out like where I stood, like trying to like decide for myself, and I still like have a lot of questions about things, and that's one of them. Like, you know, are you forcing someone to work when someone's working for you, or not? Like, I can't like on the same token, like I can't be held responsible for what someone else does. You know, like I can't take responsibility for everyone else's actions because that's too much. Like, you know, like if I don't have direct control over your actions, then I'm not held responsible for them. So it's like, and again, it comes down to like, I try not to look at the behavior so much anymore, like, oh, making a list of do's and don'ts on Sabbath, but like what's my motivation here? Like, why am I doing this? Like, why would I want to be going out to eat? Like for me, like if, like again, if a bunch of unbelievers like were getting together for a birthday party and they're all going out to eat, I'd probably go. You know, like to go with them because like I don't feel so strongly about the behavior of like going out to eat, you know, on Sabbath. So I probably would go, but would I go out to eat on my own just because I feel like I want to go out? Probably not. Like, do you see like there's a difference? You know, something like that, or like for me, I try to focus more on like the intention of why I'm doing it. Like if my best friend is in from out of town and they're not a Sabbath person and they want to go to the mall and hang out, I'll probably go with them, right? But I'm not going to sit here like, oh, you know what, on Sabbath today, I really just want to go shopping at the mall, like when I could do something else. Does that make sense?
Well, when the disciples, they were picking grain in the fields and eating on Sabbath, the Pharisees were like, y'all sinning because you're working on the Sabbath.
Right, it's like, no, we're eating, actually.
Yeah, well, he was like, you gotta take care of your needs, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
yeah.
what is that? Sometimes taking care of your needs entails working.
Yeah.
I'm curious why politics is underlined.
Oh, I was just making a joke.
Oh, I was wondering if it was a gap and you're like, this is a big one.
Well, I mean, it is because we're in
It
an
is.
election year, but I was just making a joke that poly means multiple and ticks is blood-sucking insects. So politics are full of blood-sucking insects. Anyways, that's just a joke. Anyway. Yeah. Anyways. That is all I have. If someone wants to just close it out, we can keep talking, or you can stay. No one has to leave or anything, but I feel like we just have an ending point so that we don't just stare at each other. You know what I mean? So we don't just keep looking at each other. We can keep talking after. Does anybody want to pray?
I can pray.
Okay, thanks, Kaylee.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for a beautiful day you've given us. Thank you for the week that we had. Thank you for your blessings and just helping us to learn more about you and your word. I pray that you will help us understand it more, and I pray that as the Sabbath day starts, that you help us to have a good day and to help us to remember you throughout the day. I pray that you will take us home safely and that you will stay with us there. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.